Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Barbarak, the Executive Director of the Beale Regional Health Foundation. It's our mission to identify and address the diverse healthcare needs in our community, and it's our intent to help our region's school nurses further their education in topics that are important to them. So that's why we created these Lunch and Learns specifically for school nurses. I want to thank our partners in the presentation today, the Hermitage Police Department and Officer Sammy Staples. Officer Staples has been with the Hermitage Police Department since May of 2010, and he currently serves in the role of Community Engagement Officer. He obtained his master's degree in criminal justice from YSU in 2006, where his original research thesis focused on juvenile offenders' perspective of programming and treatment effectiveness. He recently completed a graduate certificate in the threat assessment and management in schools from California, in schools from California University of Pennsylvania. He's taught multiple courses at Butler Community College, Westminster College, and Slippery Rock University, and he's currently the president of the Criminal Justice Curriculum Advisory Board at Slippery Rock. Officer Staples has presented to all kinds of different school administration, teachers, churches, in the concepts of threat assessment and management in school settings, and to parents, nursing school students, and church congregations about trafficking awareness, prevention, and reporting. And he has also spoken to 7th and 12th grade students at area schools and church youth groups about many pertinent topics such as social and emotional development, belonging, healthy versus unhealthy relationships, grooming processes and techniques, and sexting, age of consent, safe social media usage. So a very, very impressive line of topics and impressive resume, Officer Staples. We want to thank you for being here today, and I'm going to turn it over to Officer Sammy Staples.
Thank you so much. And again, thanks for being here. I'm happy to be able to continue this mission and this focus. It's so important for teachers and nurses and just school personnel and adults in general to be able to be aware of what is going on, because there's so little awareness and belief that it happens. So today this is actually kind of a hybrid. As you mentioned, I talked to different groups of different audiences. So I have two presentations that are distinctly different, but follow the same concepts. So this is one I developed for a summit in May that I'll be speaking at about sex trafficking awareness. So again, it's kind of a hybrid. It deals with some of the things I talk to kids about and also what I talk to the adults about. So obviously our goals, objectives for today, to ignite that passion for knowledge, awareness, and prevention in the fight against sex trafficking, human trafficking. It is a worldwide problem. Identify the different forms of sex trafficking and the different types of traffickers. People wouldn't believe that there's 4 or 5 different types of traffickers, and that even includes family members. So we have to understand these kids that are at risk, the vulnerabilities that make them, what makes them vulnerable to these groomers and to these traffickers and exploiters. And for us as adults, just being aware, recognize these signs, these indicators of these kids, young adults that may be being trafficked. To understand prevention concepts such as protective factors and competency development, give these kids resources, give them tools to use to protect themselves. And lastly, know how and where to report what you think might be trafficking or exploitation. So I just added this in here actually just a couple weeks ago. So this is when we talk about some concepts, again, they overlap, they're similar, but they are different as well. So we're talking about it as a whole, but different concepts apply to different types of traffickers, different types of victims. So just understand, please, that this is a generalization. Although we will touch on individual and specific concepts, this is a general presentation. Again, the one I do to adults in church congregations, this is where I've done it. They've been very welcoming, and I've been very fortunate to get into these places, and I would love to get into more. And then the next slide is where I've talked to the kids, these schools and these churches. And again, they're just so welcoming. It's been such a great opportunity to speak to these young kids. And see their responses. I mean, the level of attention they give is really, really exciting. They do pay attention, and it's awesome. Some of their questions, some of their discussions, really cool. And I always like to add, this is not my own research. This is stuff I put together through trainings, through just learning and reading, and I'm not taking credit for it. And none of this is mine. I don't own it. I just want to aim to spread that awareness, get that prevention, that education, and I would do it for free. There's never a cost with this. I would do it on my days off for free. So when we talk about awareness that it exists, awareness of trafficking, I asked, what does it mean to be aware? So it's the quality or state of knowing that something exists, something is happening, or something that exists that, again, these parents don't understand. This is happening. This does exist. Yes, in Pennsylvania. Yes, in Mercer County. Yes, in Hermitage. It's happening now in schools. And we have to stress that first and foremost, that people just don't want to believe. So what is the opposite of being aware? I would say oblivious. I start with this video. It's roughly 6 minutes. There's very little dialogue, but just focus on what is not said. And again, just the obliviousness of parents and what's going on.
It's not letting me click on the link.
I've had to pull it up on YouTube separately before. Oh. He just searched like oblivious trafficking video.
Can you hear the sound?
Yes.
Did you get your homework done?
Yes, Mom, can you please leave?
Okay, fine.
I gotta go finish my homework at Jessica's.
Again?
Yeah.
Okay, have fun.
Bye.
Hey, you have 1 hour. You have another appointment.
I know, it's not my first time.
So there's always some eerie silence when that video ends. And if you, we touch on it briefly, but some of the parents didn't even notice in the video that when the mother walks in, she asked her about her homework and the daughter said she was done. But then when she comes downstairs and says she's going to finish her homework, the mother didn't even catch that. So you're just not paying attention. And that video just brings up so many questions. And so. So when we talk about human trafficking, sex trafficking, labor trafficking, what is it? It's the forced or coercion in exchange for labor services or a commercial sex act. And then what is a commercial sex act? It's anything for gratification in exchange for an item of value. Prostitution, pornography, or anything that essentially forces an adult or a minor to engage in someone's gratification for money at their expense. So why does it exist? Why do we have sex trafficking victims? Why is it such a problem? Because it is a supply answer. These women, these young men and women are a supply for the demand of sex buyers are in demand, and they're being fed because there's kids out there that are not being protected, that are not understanding what's going on. So again, when we go back to that slide where it said, please note, again, we're talking about, this is a generalization. There are different forms of sex trafficking. Survival sex is literally where a female or male does it on their own for money, for rent, sometimes to feed their children. But again, they're being taken advantage, they're being exploited. Somebody's taking advantage of the fact that they need something and they're using it against them. Pimps or romantic partners, gang, organized crime, that is where they are doing it on a larger scale for proceeds, almost like a business. And then family facilitation, yes, there are mothers, fathers, uncles, cousins that are trafficking their nieces, nephews, sons, and daughters. Types of traffickers, the guerrilla pimp is, he will rule strictly by fear and violence and keep these women typically afraid for their lives. The Romeo is the one that will trick them into moving out, trick them into saying that they love them. They'll shower them with attention and affection and then get them to do things for the relationship or for both of them because he loves her. And again, gang and organized crime, more of a business. And then the family members can do it for several reasons as well. Money, drugs, things like that. So what does a sex trafficker look like? You know, we have visions. If you've seen the movie Taken, these people think it doesn't happen here. You can spot one immediately. No, traffickers through investigations and through public arrests, and they've been shown to be priests, pastors, coaches, businessmen. You can't look at a person and say yes or no. They can look like anybody or any profession, any race, gender. So how can they do what they do? So they have a belief in, have been socialized to, or adapt very quickly to minimizing and dehumanizing others. Now, there's also a link to their background, maybe where they were trafficked and then they chose to become that predator because they've been through it. So it can be a choice or it can be an opportunity, which we'll touch on, but they have an innate ability to exploit someone's vulnerabilities for their profit without caring about it. Exploitation through rationalization. They convince themselves that they're not doing anything wrong, or blame shifting. Again, that was the way they were raised. That's what they've seen. If I don't do it, somebody else will. They put the blame on the victims. They're going to do it anyways. I might as well manage their money for them. They can't manage their money, or it's their choice. They're choosing to do it. In almost every case, it's not their choice. But again, they're convincing themselves that what they're doing is okay. The personality traits, they've been linked in several studies to have a similar mindset to a psychopath, or if you don't know, psychopathy is not yes or no. It falls along a continuum of behavior and of brain waves. So they've been linked to follow that same mindset, same thought process, interpersonally, behaviorally, and affectively. So we'll talk about that a little bit, what that means and how they can, again, convince themselves. So they're manipulative, they're deceitful, glib, superficial charm. Again, if you didn't know them, they would come off as maybe funny, charming. You'd buy them a drink. You wouldn't think anything at first, but they're very convincing, almost like a con artist. But behaviorally, that's the irresponsibility, the parasitic. You're literally living off of somebody else and what you're putting them through. They're impulsive. They choose themselves first. They will use the impulsivity of anger, of fear, of aggression to keep these women and even men afraid. And obviously they lack realistic long-term goals. This is not sustainable. It's not humanitarian. So they don't think, they lack maturity. They lack social and emotional intelligence. They lack empathy. They lack remorse and guilt. Obviously they're very callous towards what they're doing through either convincing themselves or they just don't care. And again, going back to that blame shifting, it's never their fault. They're in it with them, and they don't see anything wrong with what they're doing. So these young boys and girls, men and women, young adults, what makes them vulnerable? These traffickers, these groomers, these exploiters, they're not going to target or focus on the two-parent married household where these kids are well adjusted, they're in activities, they're staying busy. They're looking at these vulnerabilities, these risk factors that make these kids susceptible to this. Their prior abuse, neglect, low self-esteem, bullied, rejected, runaways, throwaways. Again, these kids that don't get the attention, don't get the affection, and are seeking it so badly. Even the disabilities intellectually, developmentally, and CYS, foster cares, and the system can be a breeding ground for recruitment and for trafficking. People seem to think it's only girls that get victimized and get exploited. While it may be a higher percentage, boys are also exploited, trafficked, and groomed, typically by females or other sex buyers. And given their age, the boys might connect themselves to sex buyers through social media. So again, it is both males and females. And the boys, on the next slide, you'll see the boys are not seen as much of a victim. They're seen as more complicit in what they're doing. And obviously that's not the case, but society has failed them in that way, and which could lead to heavy drug use and abuse. And when they get placed in these foster cares or anything, there's a stigma there. They're seen as maybe a sex offender. Again, they have more to do with it than a female did. And that can be obviously very stressful, very frustrating. They can respond with violence and aggression. We're going to touch on these following 3 or 4. Again, they're going to overlap, and I tell they were separate slides. I've kind of been trying to tie it in more clearly. So these were several separate slides, but we're going to kind of combine it because they do overlap so much. So dynamic offending, sexual aggression, grooming, and power balance. This is what I try to really stress to these kids that I talk to in these schools, especially the grooming, power imbalance, and sexual aggression, because what these groomers are doing, they're exposing kids and getting these young adults and kids used to things that are not normal and should not be, they're not age appropriate and they shouldn't be normal. They're going to identify and target those that are vulnerable and gather that intelligence. And they're going to get in maybe sometimes with the family. So they're going to get the parents to trust them. They're going to get the kids to trust them. And when you get those vulnerabilities, you're giving them attention, affection, and then you're going to build that fake sense of trust. And once you have that, that's when you start pushing those boundaries. You're going to manipulate. You're going to use language. Again, it's not appropriate, not age appropriate, not respectful. And then you're going to use offensive, aggressive behavior where you're going to get them used and exposed to being touched, to certain offensive language, push those boundaries. And I always also make sure these kids understand what playing the victim means. If these kids start to recognize or have that gut feeling that something's wrong, and they might question it or say something, these exploiters, these groomers will now turn it around and play the victim on these kids and make the kids doubt themselves, make the kids feel bad that now they hurt their feelings. And I tell these kids, once you are doubting yourself, once somebody has you doubting yourself, you're going down a very dangerous road. And then all that's going to establish that power and control and prevent that disclosure. And we'll talk about more how grooming establishes power, control, and isolation. So we all know it's a process that's used by these exploiters for the purpose of creating the sense of trust prior to actual victimization. So they're going to build that friendship, that trust. They're going to give them things, shower them with gifts. And once they have them, that trust is there, and they might have even removed them from certain supports and resources and friends and family. It's pretty much downhill from there. It's going to now turn openly forceful and abusive and coerced. Stages of grooming, again, they're going to target those that are vulnerable, those that are showing those risk factors, gain that trust. And notice that's in quotes. I always tell the kids it's in quotes for a reason. It's a fake, it's a false sense of trust. And they might even gain the trust of your family, of your parents. And they're going to feel that need. They're going to be that person that's there for you, that you can talk to, that will do anything for you, because these kids need something. And the isolation can come physically or emotionally, or they're going to separate you from your friends, from your family. Again, you might move in with them, or they're going to get you away from your friends. They're going to cause those rifts, cause those disagreements and arguments, cause that stress and tension. And so you have no choice but to rely on this one person now. And again, sexualizing the relationship and maintaining that control. I show another video to the youth, and it has to do with it's a lady that works in sexual exploitation, and she talks about the five warning signs of grooming, or what she calls friending, and gifting is a big one. So again, it's with the gifting concept, these kids think that this person really does love them or like them, and they're giving them all this stuff. Gifting is intentional. It's building that intentional debt that now this person, when I say, okay, now you owe me, like that wasn't free. And now they're stuck there. There's debt that now they have to work off, and essentially. sharing that material, exploiting a kid's natural curiosity, exposing them to pornography, exposing them to drugs and alcohol. You're taking what is natural and what should be talked about with a mature, responsible adult, and you're using it against them. Breaking those rules with drug and alcohol use, secret communication, and again, blaming and confusing, going back to playing the victim. When you get these kids so confused and they're wondering what's going on, and then they start to doubt themselves and they're confused about how they feel and they think it's their fault. That's very dangerous. Grooming has been shown to be such a powerful process. Again, these kids are vulnerable. It works on a certain population, and because it is so subtle, gradual, and it escalates. So it's going to start so sweet, so innocent, and it's going to gradually increase in intensity and escalate to, again, where now they owe them something, whether it be money or whatever, or drugs or alcohol. And once they're stuck, they're really stuck. And when it gets to be angry and aggressive and frustrating, they don't understand why. They want that affection back. They want that what they thought was comfort and peace back. And they're going to do whatever they can to try to get it back because they think it was their fault. And I try to tell these kids it was never, ever going to be that way. It's the affection, the money, the attention will always be temporary. Then there's a reason for it. The honeymoon period is emotional, again, because these kids have those needs, they have those voids for attention. And by then they could either just shut up and deal with it. They can be shamed into silence. Now they're just like, oh man, I messed this up. They assume they're the only one. They assume that nobody else has messed it up like they did. And now they're ashamed. They're depressed. They're angry. And then they just could turn to numbness and just rely on drugs and alcohol and just put up with the abuse because now they think they deserve it. The school setting is where a lot can be occurring, and there's so many dynamics in a school setting. And when I talk to these kids, I tell them, with your emotions, your frustrations, your stresses, I tell them it's real. I said, no, but anybody who doubts what you're feeling shouldn't be telling you that. So it's tough to be growing up now, especially with cell phones and social media. So I want to make it clear that I tell these kids, I understand what you're feeling is real. Don't ever think it's not. But there's these kids, again, through vulnerabilities, they want status, they want certain things, and these other kids are willing to use that imbalance against them. So, and it just creates, again, that imbalance of power, because now these kids can be telling them to do something, do this for me, do this for us, boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever. But these kids are almost exploiting themselves because they want a status or they want something so bad because of that need to fill a void. I show them this the power and control wheel. I'm sure we've all seen the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I usually touch on not the bottom one, but the four of them. I talk to the kids about basic safety, belongingness, esteem, and cognitive needs. So just to make sure these kids are aware that these are needs everybody has. These are needs that'll never go away, even into adulthood. We need to feel like we have a voice, like we're in control. So I touch on, thank you. So basic need, again, if you don't have these basic needs, shelter, protection, physical security, some kids are going to school, with clothes on that they're hungry, they're whatever happened to them last night. They need a freedom from fear. These kids are vulnerable because they are scared, because they don't feel safe anywhere. And it's tough, and it's so sad to see. You can almost tell which ones when you look at them, when you talk to them, some of the expressions on faces when I'm reading the room, and you can tell which ones are really feeling what I'm talking about. And it's kind of heartbreaking. And then belongingness. Again, it's such a huge building and there's so many kids, and the communication for a kid to feel like somebody wants to talk to him or her, or for somebody that who can they talk to, the intimacy of having those close friends, having those close relationships, and being someone that other kids, again, want to talk to, want to interact with. A lot of kids don't have that. And then that's when they're going to find it elsewhere. And these adults, these groomers know that, and that's what they're preying on. And this is always a fun one when I get in the classrooms, because especially in school settings, I always ask them, of these three, which one's most important? And they'll always usually say self-respect. But when you get in a school building, the reputation, that status, it's so misleading. And I tell them, but by the end of your school years, it's not going to matter. Self-respect is the only thing that's going to matter. That's what you need to focus on. And the knowledge, understanding, and self-awareness of who they are, of what they're going through, of the choices they make. You just can't impress enough on them that you have to be aware of what's going on within you and around you. So why are these kids, the ones I focus on, 7th through 12th graders, why are they vulnerable? These risk factors, because they're naive. They don't understand life experience, or they haven't had any life experiences, but the gifting, this debt bondage, they accept these gifts and they think it's free, or they don't see the long term because they're naive. And they're also they're developing an intensity of feelings, of emotions and these attachments. So when these people show them this affection, it hits them hard because that's what they want, that's what they crave. And you couple that with a natural growing apart. As they're getting older, they're starting to hopefully mature mentally. They want to be less dependent on their parents. They want to make those decisions on their own. So if you have one, maybe two, but when you factor in all three of these with kids that are vulnerable, you can see how quickly bad things can happen. Of course, back when I was growing up, the places were like the movie theater or the mall or the food court, but that doesn't seem to happen anymore. So now a young adult or a young kid can get groomed or get recruited from their phone. And so I just tell them, and obviously group homes, detention centers, anywhere a kid is vulnerable or is showing risk factors, that's where an exploiter will find them. Warning signs or indicators of possible exploitation or trafficking. Again, you have to know kids, be around kids. If you observe something, is it a deviation of the baseline of the kid that you know? You can't just assume because one or two of these things are present that he's being trafficked. So, but again, you look at chronic runaways, absences, sudden dramatic changes in behavior, moody, aggressive. What kind of clothing are they wearing? What are they saying? Are they sexualizing their language? It's not age appropriate. Or you can just tell, they're being exposed to something it's not age appropriate. And those are just things to consider and to look into, especially in a school setting, as a teacher, as a school nurse, when you have the access to these children. I'm not trying to plug this. So controlling relationships. They might have a boyfriend or a girlfriend that's very controlling and dominating, which always makes you concerned. They have to ask for permission, things like that. Are they getting these expensive gifts? Where are they getting it from? Do they understand? Again, back to the gifting, they're going to have to pay it back. Hypervigilance, paranoid behaviors. You saw that video where the guy just grabbed the girl and pulled her in the room. So what are they being exposed to? Who's touching them? The adverse touch reflex. If there's a student that you have that's looks like they're focusing, and you come up and you just touch them on the shoulder and they jump or they freak out. They don't like being touched anymore if they don't see it coming. So things like that. Defer to others. Now this is more of like for a young adult in a different situation where you'd ask them a question, they'd look to somebody else, they won't answer you, or they'll look or expect somebody else to speak for them. Constant self-deprecation, no eye contact, gaps in memory. Again, some of these girls are leaving school on a Friday and not coming back home till Sunday evenings. They've lost time. They could be drugs and alcohol. They don't want to remember what's happening to them. Unaddressed, untreated medical issues, exhaustion, dehydration, malnutrition. Again, these are all things, no one by itself, but again, the more we're around children, the more we know them, understanding that the more of these that we can put together, there's a chance something might be going on. So next slide, please. So how can it be prevented? How can we help these children? We talk about risk factors. Well, there's protective factors as well. Competency development, and engage and educate these kids and make this engagement and education realistic. So build that self-esteem, encourage inclusion, acceptance. We have to fight so hard against that bullying and against the cyberbullying, and it's these kids that are being left out, that are turning to other forms of attention. Communication and awareness. Kids should talk to other kids about unhealthy relationships, control, pressure and fear. When I talk to these schools and the other presentation, I talk about, control means care, and there's these girls that are like nudging each other because obviously one girl has a boyfriend that's, she can't go anywhere without asking him, or she has to give up her phone. So these girls are hearing it and they're understanding that it is happening in and around, with and around them. Those healthy relationships, you have to foster and encourage those, the openness, the privacy, the trust and communication. And again, everybody has a phone now. 11-year-olds, these kids that are so young that have phones now, and it's so dangerous with what they're giving out, the pictures they're sending.
Did we lose him?
I think we might have lost him, so just bear with us a moment here.
I think at one point he said something about he was trying to plug his laptop in.
I'm sure he'll be back
Yeah.
in a moment here.
It's a very powerful presentation. There
That
he
was
is.
embarrassing. My laptop died on me.
I said, I thought you were trying to plug your laptop in at one point.
It's a new one. I'm like, where in the heck is the port? I'm like, I'm trying not to move too much. So, sorry about that.
That's okay.
So yeah, and one of these slides, this slide I do give to the kids, and we talk about it, healthy versus unhealthy. And before I put this up, I asked them to give me some words that would describe a healthy relationship, and they touch on most of these without seeing it, so that's always encouraging. But again, the understanding that trust and privacy, honesty, and the consent part, and support and praise. If you're not with somebody who's supporting you and praising you and talking you out of dumb decisions, and again, this could be boyfriend, girlfriend, but it could also be, just friends, two friends that are looking out for each other. Go ahead. And so then when we talk about misconceptions of healthy, happy relationships, and I also tell these kids that, just because they're young, being a police officer, we deal with young adults into their 20s and 30s that haven't gotten it yet. They're not, I'm there to help them just see and just hopefully give them a foundation to build on. By no means are just because we're older that we know how to master relationships, because we don't. And it's okay for them to understand that, good or bad, you have to work through it. Relationships are a process, and you have to put work into them. So that being obsessed means being in love. Again, that's a misconception. Control means care. The permission, you shouldn't have to ask your boyfriend or girlfriend if you can go somewhere, go out with your friends. Anger or aggression, with these young girls, they upset their boyfriends, and they feel bad or think it's okay to be told that she makes him so mad that's not good. That's not healthy. And again, sex is an obligation. Sex means love. Of course, I tell them no, it does not. You should never be pressured into anything like that. And they're built on and can develop very quickly into violence, threats of violence, and that peer pressure, that manipulation, coercion and control. Once these young kids start to deal with or just internalize unhealthy relationships, that's where they're gonna build that. That's when they're going to open themselves to that abuse, that depression, that anxiety, and that's when they're going to get almost desensitized to it and really expose themselves to just the fact that, well, maybe this is just the way my life's going to be. And it's really sad to see that just resignment that that's just the way it is. Competencies, again, we could do things to help, and kids can do things to help themselves. As a school, family, community, there's things we can do to make sure that we're instilling these values and these competencies in these children and helping them do it within themselves. So individually, go ahead. You can change it, please. Intellectually, so it's such a, I mean, you can talk about academically, but the intellectual and emotional intelligence, psychological, just being aware of what's going on, being aware of how you feel, being aware of who makes you feel a certain way. And again, not thinking that it's okay. You have to understand, you have to fight for yourself, respect yourself, and socially, you know, don't chase that status, don't chase that reputation, that peer pressure, you know, don't give into that. So these kids have to be strong in their minds, and being able to be, you know, confident, be smart, and have that emotional IQ it's just so important. And it's going to translate into socially where they're not going to chase that attention or chase that affection. Identifying their thoughts, their emotions, and how that makes them react physically. So I tell these kids, you know, you're not going to like everybody, but you have to respect everybody, respect differences, embrace differences. Understand your thoughts will affect your feelings, will affect your behavior. And the more you, again, can process that, can become competent in being self-aware and managing yourself, it's just such a huge resource that these kids can begin to build such a strength or foundation on. Empathy, you know, you can't stress that enough, especially with what's going on in society today. And like I'd say, it's the understanding or the sharing of the feelings. And I tell these kids, you know, don't think about it as understanding, think about it as you don't understand what somebody else is going through. Like, don't come to school, don't be that person that you have no idea what this kid went through last night. Don't be the one to push them over the edge. You know, you have no clue what anybody else goes through. So you don't understand a thing about somebody else. Don't assume that you do. And I tend to get very stern because that's very important to me. Like, these kids, they think they can say what they want, do what they want, and you have no idea how you're hurting somebody else. And we're all different, and we all should be different. We have to appreciate and embrace those differences, which again, as a society, we're just not doing. And consider consequences of your actions. You know, there's intention versus impact. Like, something that you meant to do or meant to say, you had it in your head one way, but it came out a different way. Understand that just because you thought you meant something, that doesn't give you, it's not an excuse for how it came out or how you made somebody else feel. Socially, those communication skills, those conversational skills, if you're going to pick out a problem, or if you're going to be vocal, then say something to resolve it. Don't just say it to point it out and create drama and gossip. So, and the call to resolution, you know, you have to give and receive feedback. You have to talk, you have to listen, you know, respect people's boundaries. And like I tell them, social pressure is real. For them, it is definitely real. You have to manage it and understand that the choices you make, you know, you can add pressure to yourself or you can relieve pressure from yourself. And again, just as a family school community, we all have to provide those physical, psychological safeties, make these students feel like they're safe in the building, safe within their own minds. We cannot allow bullying, and too many teachers let it happen. School just can say what they want. They're letting bullying happen. Be those support systems and give kids opportunities to belong. It's our job as adults to include kids in with other groups, make kids interact with each other, as far as I'm concerned. Positive social norms, we have to model that behavior as well. There's adults that can't get along, and we're modeling sometimes very poor behavior among our children and in our neighborhoods, and they see it, and they're going to internalize that as well. Engaging and educating. Again, we have to engage the students that are at risk. Go ahead, please. So yeah, recognizing those that are displaying the indicators, you know, you can tell the ones that sit by themselves, the ones that don't have that self-esteem or anything, or the ones that are chasing that status, chasing that reputation. Avoid arbitrary discipline, avoid that punitiveness, where if a kid is some of those on that list, he might be, his grades are dropping, her grades are dropping, she's quitting sports, she's not showing up to school. Don't just assume that it's their choice. Avoid those punitive, okay, you're suspended, just get out of my face. No, sit them down, find out that deeper cause. Okay, what's going on? Is everything okay? Talk to them, because there's probably something else to it. No kid just drops activities because they want to. Educate children and empower them through awareness, through knowledge, through those competencies. When we talk about those lists, there's different types of trafficking, there's different types of traffickers. So we have to make the awareness realistic, make it culturally relevant, make it socially relevant, and just make them understand that bad things, you don't want to scare kids, but you have to make them understand that bad things can happen through bad choices. And they have to know that. And if they're not developing themselves, that competency, that decision-making, that's usually when bad things happen. So school mental health professionals, school nurses, why is it vital? You guys, especially, you have direct access to potentially high-risk groups. You can identify the issues at home, those, the abuse, the neglect, the maltreatment. Special education curriculum, almost a quarter of victims are typically special needs because for various reasons, but because there's a stigma there that they can't report, they're not going to be able to be as communicative in their experiences. And it's very hard sometimes to get them as victims and get their account, get their story, and be able to put together a prosecution based on what they're saying. And unfortunately, they are targeted because of that. And I do end, like when I talk to the adults, I do end with, we all travel, we all are in and out of, sometimes on vacations, hotels, gas stations, convenience stores. So how can we help young adults, help people that we don't know that might be being trafficked? We've all been places where we may have seen signs of trafficking. And again, this goes back to the form of, you're probably talking about young adults, older females, not kids, of course, but in a gas station, in a hotel lobby where there's several of them and there's one male, maybe two, you can tell they're not related. Just the dialogue is very disrespectful. It's very aggressive. So there's things that we can hopefully be seeing that we've probably all missed at some point. So I always just like to tell people, be observant in gas stations, convenience stores. They may just, again, display those signs of aggression, very obscene, vulgar language, is so disrespectful. And you might be able to tell that these women, or maybe even men, they look submissive, they look anxious, they look afraid. But what do we do about that? They may demean them publicly, use those threats right in front of you because they're usually pretty coarse individuals, and they don't really care. They're confrontational by nature, or because that's what gets them, that's what instills that fear, and that's what makes it awkward, where most people will just walk away and not want to do anything about that. So how can we, I'm not saying intervene, I'm not saying, for people should be a hero, but if you see anything like, they lack freedom of movement, or they're being talked down to, they won't look at anybody. Usually they don't even have their own money, their own IDs or documents. So if they're in a store, or if they're somewhere and you see this, what can we do? Be observant, be descriptive, but obviously keep yourself safe. But I always like to tell people, if you see that and it makes you awkward or makes you uncomfortable, but just hang back, watch what's going on, and then maybe follow them out, again, carefully, but see what vehicle they leave in, write it down, make, model, license plate, color. If you hear names or you see tattoo, whatever you can write down, location, see which way they leave, see which direction they're going in. And then there's those, we'll talk about some numbers to call, but you get this information and you give it to these hotlines, and you never know. I mean, you could be one person that reported this and there is nothing, but you could also have been the 20th person to make this exact same report in the same area with a license plate, with the vehicle color, with the make and model, tattoos, nicknames. You never know. You could have broken up an entire ring, but you just never know what you might stumble across just by making a phone call with some information. So again, sorry for that little mishap where it died on me, but and again, thank you so much for letting me talk today. And if there's any other information, or if I can speak to any agencies or place that you guys know, please let me know.
Donna, if you stop the recording, we can open it up and see. I don't know if anyone on here